What if the most important thing that happened in AI this year wasn't a model launch at all? Welcome back to XTraw AI, and welcome to our 2025 year-end special, which also happens to be the season 16 finale. And the XTraws are back with Raghu, Lukas, Sesh, and Manjeet. Over the last 12 months, we watched AI move at breakneck speed. New models launched, agents showed up at work, infrastructure scaled like never before, and regulation stopped being a future problem and became a present reality. But when we step back, 2025 wasn't the year AI simply got smarter. It was the year AI got real. Real enough to reshape how companies invest, real enough to change how work gets done, real enough to force governments, institutions, and society to ask harder questions about responsibility, trust, and control. So today, the XTraws are back, and we're not just doing headlines. We're telling the story of AI in 2025, quarter by quarter, what shifted, what surprised us, and what this year quietly set in motion for 2026 and beyond. And because this is the season 16 finale, we're also going to reflect on a bigger journey, how far the AI conversation itself has come, and why the next chapter will be less about experimentation and much more about execution. I'm glad you're here for this one. Let's close out the year and the season the XTraw AI way.
All right, welcome back to our monthly overview that we do in the context of what's happening around the globe in the context of AI. And today, I believe, as discussed, we wanted to do a year-end roundup of what happened in the context of AI. I know we want to discuss, we generally discuss about the four different categories, like the product launches, the infrastructure, the ecosystem, and ethics and compliance. But this time, I think we can go about how things have evolved or how things have shaped in these 4 quarters or whatever in the overall year 2025. So welcome on board, Lukas, and welcome on board, Sesh. I believe Manjeet will be joining a little later. How have you been, Sesh?
Yeah, all good. It's been an exciting year, I guess. A lot of things moving from an AI domain perspective. So it's always interesting to have this conversation with you guys.
Over to you, Lukas. How are things in your world?
So first of all, we're at the end of the year. Everything gets a little bit slower, which is incredibly enjoyable because the rest of the year accelerated so much. I mean, at the beginning of the year, we didn't even have Gemini 2.0. Now we have 3.0. It's like everything is just spiraling and going really fast. So having maybe 10 days where everybody agrees, let's go slower, is amazing. And I'm enjoying it with my family very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So let's get started. I know I took a bit of a timeline perspective this time about the 4 quarters. I know in the quarter one, I would term this as the realization phase, when the theme is AI is everywhere, when we were just starting with 2025, and it's kind of getting accountable. I would say that the Q1 did feel quite dramatic, but something fundamental things have shifted, right? I think the distribution of these AI stuff has expanded and regulation showed up as and when needed. So I know, how did you feel? I know it's tough to get back and understand what happened in Q1, but I could see that in Q1, we have seen that Gemini 2.0 got kind of moved from preview to everyday availability. Then it also became clear that AI was no longer a software problem, but it has become an infrastructure and energy problem. And then governance also caught up, right? I think in February or March, when the EU AI Act came out, and then the organizations were not completely ready or just about getting ready. So to get started, I think, Sesh, what is your take on these aspects about how things have just started up in the first quarter or maybe in the first half of the year?
Yeah, that's actually very interesting to look back and um, capture how fast things have changed in a year. Just talking about our themes, right? From infrastructure standpoint, beginning of the year, we were all talking about GPUs and how many GPUs we can buy. But very quickly, we noticed that towards the end of the year or later part of the year itself, the talk was less about GPUs in the infrastructure space. It was more about power data centers, how many reactors you can build, right? So in Q1, we heard about NVIDIA shipping mass market Blackwell units and immediately selling out like 18 within the next 18 months or something. But very quickly, if you look at the second quarter and the third quarter, we are talking about a power crisis. Big techs begin kind of buying real estate and acquiring decommissioned nuclear power plants to secure energy. So it rapidly changed. The term infrastructure moved from GPUs to power, and then again, it also evolved to every every region, every country having a sovereign cloud towards that infrastructure, creating that cultural compute and having it in shows. So the landscape quickly changed just in the infrastructure domain, right? And speaking about innovation, we touched upon the whole Gemini 2.0 to having newer models, but it was not just moving the model, it was also the medium. We moved from chatting with the AI to AI becoming an agent, being multimodal, having deep reasoning. And now we are talking about agentic workflows, which is always a term, but now becoming realistic. And soon we'll have personal AI devices, I guess, for the next year, or maybe some part we'll already have, right? So just in the infra and innovation space, there has been so many changes in the last 4 quarters, almost a directional shift from just compute to infrastructure, power point of view, multimodal to personal agentic workflows. And again, I think the trend is going to continue. So it's been an interesting year overall. Too many things collapsed in just 1 quarter, I guess. One year, I guess.
Right. I think you put it across very well. Coming to you, Lukas, I think, what did you find? I know, again, don't worry too much about the timelines, but what did you see evolving when I started talking about the Q1 to Q2, or the first quarter to the second quarter and first half to the second half? I know there are a lot of things happening. What really struck you?
I think you put it perfectly by saying the realization, because
Yeah.
at the end of 2024, we had the first thinking models, and 2025 was all about test time compute scaling. So what that means is we only really scaled the pre-training, meaning what goes into the models, more data, more training meaning crocking, or all these, like we like really heavily focused on what goes in the models. And then there was like the fine tuning and all of that jazz. I could go into details, but what I really want to say is we unlocked like one new thing that to me defines 2025: test time compute. Reasoning models, meaning models that don't just one shot the answer, going like, okay, let's give you the answer, but really create traces. And now in pretty much all of the models today, you can click a button if you ask a hard question, and you can see like the thinking traces where it says, oh, okay, the question is this. I should probably answer in that way. I could do this and that. And it kind of walks through how it should be answered. And to me, like when you ask the realization for Q1 as like a headline, that to me is 2025. It really
Right.
started this
Right.
year that we got like an extra world of scaling where we could put in more compute. And the reason why Sesh had to talk about so much infrastructure the last couple of minutes is because that scales really, really well. If you look at the benchmarks, the gains you get by just letting more tokens be produced are insane. So just to give an order of magnitude kind of reference, it's easily possible to have 10 times more token be created than the output just to get to a better result. And I think for me, that is like 2025. We unlocked a new paradigm. It
Mm-hmm.
had insane effects, whether it's on electricity, infrastructure, GPUs, politics, whatnot, right? And that was what really, for me, shaped Q1 and then the rest of the year. And well, we know that we're still a couple of breakthroughs and innovations away from AGI, whatever that might be. But that certainly was defining for me for 2025 and especially Q1.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I know. I think from then on, I think when we moved from Q1 to Q2, I think we the one thing which I've noted or noticed is that innovation outran control. I think there has been a lot of acceleration which has happened. And of course, when the spring was fast, I would say in Q2, there were a lot of open models which came into play. Coding assistants have started. I know they have leveled up to what could have been done. Governance and coordination, I believe it struggled to keep up pace because I think this was the time, I believe, in the Q2, we saw that uh, if I look back to my notes, I see that Llama 4 and Cloud 4 landed around that time frame, Q4. And then we started talking about AI factories. I believe this is the term I feel that it was coined or it was coming into play, and then lot of information, a lot of things were being talked about that, and of course, a lot of other things being unpacked. So, what is your take, Lucas, when we get into this phase of Q2, where we started looking at a lot of open models have surged, and then we started looking into the things like Llama 4 and Cloud 4 released, and started talking about open AI factories,
Oh my
AI
God,
factories.
there's so many things. I don't even know where to begin. But I would say there is a couple of things that are really noteworthy that we need to point out. You mentioned passingly open source models. And if
Right.
you had asked me like 3 years ago, let's
Mm-hmm.
take a bet. Do you think that open source models will be competitive in a space where training each generation, successive generation of model costs like an order of magnitude more money, right? You start with GPT-3, 100K, GPT 3.5, maybe a million, and then you escalate it up to $100 million for GPT 4.5 class frontier models. I was like, you're crazy. From like the open source is it's not going to happen, right? And then now we have like an insane amount of especially Chinese, but not exclusively AI models that are just behind, I would say, what, 5 to 9 months, roughly half a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there is data on that, but they were far behind. Now they caught up. And as we will level out in terms of the scaling, the margin will become more narrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is amazing. And I would say I'm not exactly sure when DeepSeek dropped, but I think it was Q2. So that also works into that factor. Another thing that I wanted to, oh my God, there's so much. I think there is, when you say factory, people will think about industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, there is an interesting couple of ideas you can tease out of that. So first of all, we saw a specialization, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anthropic decided, hey, we're going after the B2B coding space. We're not doing everything. OpenAI really like somehow stumbled into the consumer space. They have the biggest consumer product. They cannot back out. And honestly, I think they shouldn't even do all of the B2B development space. They want to do everything, but they don't have the pockets, the resources, and they shouldn't. And they're the behemoth in terms of the consumer space. We're already calling it like, oh, I chat GPT'd it. Just like people say, like, hey, I
Right.
Googled something, right?
Right.
And so we have a bifurcation of not everybody is doing everything. Like it's like like more professional, and like there is now like factories. By the way, the factory analogy comes from Jensen Huang, right? The
Right.
Nvidia CEO. And I feel like it's a little bit of slay of hands because he is implying that we're now creating the new factories of the future. And I think we like this view because it feels like, oh, we're producing whatever is needed for us.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what we haven't discussed and what also factors into this analogy is I personally believe that there is a good chance that companies will enlist agents, meaning AI, with higher levels of autonomy in the future, not that agents work for the employees, but that
Mm-hmm.
companies will say, like, hey, we have a couple of agents, we invest in them. If they break or if they need something, you will help them. Not like, oh, you employee number X, you get a couple of agents, they will help you. I think so. The analogy kind of like inverts or
Yeah.
kind of changes how we think about the space. And I don't think that's yet fully decided. So, tons of things that have happened. And I didn't even talk about the complete disaster that was Llama 4, which led to the complete revamp of one of the biggest tech companies, right? In terms
Right.
of AI, they fired wholesale, like an entire
Yeah.
division, hired even more people with, and I think that was also very newsworthy, like with compensation packages that sound like the GDP of small countries. So, yeah, a lot happened. And to me, in Q2, the factory, and with it, maybe the analogy of China as being the workbench for the
Right.
world. I hope that's not offensive to anyone, but that they really came into their own and created such amazing open source models. I would have never expected that, and I think it's a boon to the world.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think I like the way you've put it yeah, across this. From your end, Sesh, I think what do you think has evolved when we talk about these timelines? But just to keep in mind that in Q2, when we talk about these open source models evolving a lot more, and then the AI factories and these technology being used quite a bit, what are your thoughts and how we fared through Q2?
Um, the from a from a model perspective, of course, we are we are getting into the open source models very soon. I was just test driving the Nemetron 3 open source, and then using API to call open APIs to kind of do the model changing without using all the MCPs and all those things. It was fairly simple. So we are evolving to this multimodal as well as open source plus agent chaining model, which is
Mm-hmm.
where the true power becomes visible. And also, I think since you're talking about Q2 or maybe it was Q3, we started seeing the agentic browsers also coming in, which was kind of stringing through their agents. The Comet browser came in, and it did pretty well as well. So I think that's where the transition happened from just being uh, like a model to becoming a multimodal model to reasoning engine, and then now agent chaining. That was, I think, where things changed from uh, just being AI being an interface where you chatted to something more realistic, solving real problems. And then with deep reasoning, you're able to hand off a larger problem to the AI and then come back and then expect a more realistic response.
Beautiful. So now let's. I know, Sesh, we have already started talking a bit about the Q3, which is where I would term this as the inflection point. When we say that come August, I think this is when we had this the big launch of GPT-5. I think this is where fundamentally quite a few things changed, and then we saw the demand for inferencing has exploded during this time. And when we talk about infrastructure and so from your aspect, I think when we were talking about things happening in Q3 from August all the way to September and October timeframe, I think we see that there's a lot of this. How did all that stress with these existing infrastructure models evolve? I think kind of evolve. I would say. Any thoughts, and then we can get into the other aspects.
Uh, from a demand for the inference demand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Purely, I think a few things probably changed, which we discussed during our monthly thing. Right? One is training was no longer a bottleneck, inference was, right? And it also changed from always on AI to becoming a cost flow where you have continuous background execution to eh, come up with the right solution, not like a hallucinated kind of uh, self-fulfilling answers, right? So real-time use cases drove demand spikes, but the real deep learning and deep thinking responses were also given a value. So there was uh, that that angle which also came in, and then the discussion more around a change around the governance angle also happened, right? Who pays for the tokens? Um, Inference demand forced some companies to formalize AI usage policies internally, as you are also seeing. I think last week, I think this is probably not a good press. Like Capital One paused all of their AWS infrastructure investments because they were more looking at outcome-based pricing, whereas they were purchasing all of those things for uh, building AI. So this whole governance angle on who pays for the tokens, inference demand, forcing companies to formalize AI usage policy internally, and then also finance and legal teams demanded answers on which teams are using how much inferences is human augmentation or automation. That question also came up. So it also bordered into how humans and AI will work together, who pays for the tokens, are we paying for AI or are we paying for the outcomes? So cost attribution, internal chargebacks, usage caps, all of these things I think we saw a little bit more in Q3 and Q4 as we got into this, better models, deep learning, deep reasoning models, and all of those things, right? So now, as you look ahead, model efficiency becomes very, very strategic,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and it is also required to run cheaper and run predictably. Um, so it's no longer a toy, but more of a real outcome-driven investment that people are looking at.
Beautiful, beautiful. So coming to you, Lucas, I know Q3, I think when we talk about Q3, I think for me, it's more like this inflection point when GPT-5, the launch of GPT-5 happened, and then we saw a lot more demand exploding for inferencing and so on and so forth. What are your thoughts on how we went through that in this phase or in this quarter, Q3?
I think for me, what I was thinking while Sesh was talking is in for me in Q3, what also really started in earnest was the conversation about a bubble.
Mm.
So are all those circular deals between, well, mostly OpenAI, NVIDIA, and then Oracle and others, where essentially obligations of future services delivered are, put in the books against hardware that needs to be delivered, and then tokens that need to be created, and so forth. And it's like, it's kind of odd. It feels bubbly, right? But then when you look at the exponential curve of the tokens created and the companies actually making money, like I was like, that feels different. Like very often when things explode in terms of usage or whatever, like you want to put there. The question is it leveraged? Is it like overinflated and will it come down? But here's the issue. Google makes 100 billion per quarter. I mean, not to the same extent, but every single company of the Magnificent Seven or whatever sits on a cash mountain and like essentially a volcano of liquidity and
Right.
cash flow. So they can invest quite heavily. And what we've heard again and again is those companies seeing from day one positive ROI. Look at Meta, like how much they invested into AI and they had to, we talked about them, right? Because Llama 4, like the big models never got released because they were floundering and they had to change their entire setup. Yet every dollar spent in terms of inference for their core services, the advertisement services, has positive ROI. And they keep saying it. So it's a sensible investment again and again. However, the economics are changing
Right.
because we are spoiled in terms of the IT industry having zero marginal costs, meaning as you once created your software, you don't have to pay for it. And that really creates a very unique kind of structure for the industry. And that's why there were freemiums and ad supported tiers and cloud and all of that, right? And now we say, like, oh, wow, the tokenomics, so what people have to pay to actually use AI in their company, well, that changes the game. And all of a sudden, the companies get asset heavy. They have to put like a lot of real stuff onto their books, whether it's data centers or GPUs or whatnot, right? And also the ops, like so the not just the investment upfront, but also the running costs are going up because of the new economics of AI. And I felt like, wow, that's changing a lot. And that was for me like the most interesting part in Q3, that this whole conversation of the bubble came up, meditation on bubbles, that mostly they're like, we have bad experiences with them, but sometimes they're also
Right.
needed in terms of alignment and like questioning the foundations, whether this kind of bubble is the same as the old ones. And then also the realization that we see positive returns and it's different. And then there were like a gazillion other things that happened in Q3. Whether it's GPT-5, right? We all thought it was lackluster, but then there's tons of things that happened. And so it again, like as I said at the very beginning, it was a whirlwind. And I'm now focusing on trying to really go to the first principles and thinking about like the core things that are happening, um, especially as they pertain to the business, because I feel like that's where the long-term trends will go. And without going too deep into that, but just on what I said to elaborate one more line, the revenue margins collapsed. So we now have businesses like smaller businesses that making millions per employee, which is
Right.
unheard of. But at the same time, IT companies used to have like revenue margins of 80%, right? And now
Yeah.
they're like, if you look at companies that are AI native and younger and edgier and grow like an explosion, essentially, for lack of a better term, they have revenue margins of 30%. So
Right.
I kind of feel like with no matter what we just talked about, everything is a little bit different than what we're used to. And we're still trying to figure out what that will ultimately mean for us
Yeah.
and the businesses. And that to me is really the inflection point, that we now have line of sight to a world that needs to be different, but we haven't yet fully understood what exactly needs to change. And yet there are so many things that are currently not slipping away, but we can already tell that's not like how it used to be, whether it's the bubble, the monetization, and so forth. But I'm starting to talk in a loop, so I will hand back to you.
Yeah, I think great. I think great that you brought out this point. I think which I kind of missed it out about the talks or thoughts about an AI bubble, which kind of creeped up during this Q3. So coming to you, Sesh, let's get into the Q4. I think this is where I know there's a lot of consolidation or consequences of how we are looking at it, started looking about, right? I think this is where NVIDIA moves into this kind of an orchestration phase, and hyperscalers are doubling down into uh, energy, and then uh, agents are. We went from, I think when we talk about products, we are talking about agents went from a concept to an operating model kind of a thing, which is where some of the big firms are talking about that. And now, and of course, we all know that there is a lot happening in the world of deep fakes. And so there are uh, governments and schools and other public institutions are also taking a lot of care when we talk about deep fakes and other things. So before we get into the aspects of the future predictions or what we want to look out for in 2026, what are your thoughts, Sesh, about Q4 or how it went through?
Yeah, I think Q4, I would say it became a more pronounced phase where agents became a new operating model from demos to kind of delegation. We talked about the outcome-based pricing, which was
Mhm.
also the where it led to this whole AI bubble question, right? Because at the end of the day, when you start talking about outcome-based pricing on something which is more probabilistic, obviously you're not able to justify every bit of the investment, and then you start getting into this territory of are we in a bubble and all those things, right? So which is very bound to happen. And people who are old enough like us, where we've all been through this phase where we had the Amazons as well as the pet stores, and then there's always this question of is cloud real? Is this whole um, internet 2.0 or internet based services or self-service going to be real? And then we realize that some fall off and then some Amazons remain, and then there are new evolutions. So I guess this is all a phase where when we start talking about outcomes and then pricing on outcomes, and then we are not able to justify that, we get into this bubble discussions. And then I think eventually things will move on, and then you'll have the better outcomes, right? So we really moved to this um, from the demo phase to the real delegation and outcome based, and then evaluating outcomes and then pricing around that, right? So I think that's the right shift, I guess. It's still happening, and I'm sure along the way you will have uh, better better stories and better products and companies coming out of the way, right? But purely from an innovation standpoint, broadly, I think from a infrastructure side, things are really moving along, right? We talked about the whole going from GPU to looking at power and then sovereign clouds. And now in Q4, we were talking about real innovations in infrastructure with photonic computing, the first real world pilot test of optical light based data transfer between GPU cluster, right? That's a promising breakthrough that we're hearing from moving away from copper latency wall to more faster um, data transfer, and then which in turn will turn into better decisioning. And then we're going to, I mean, we are already hearing people talk about going from um, AGI to a new term I keep hearing now is um, um, ACI, Agentic Collective Intelligence, where
Mhm.
we're talking about humans and agents and variables and agents, and the humans variables collaborating with the peers human variables, and then coming up with a collaborative decisioning process, right? So that is actually an outcome of what I think in Q4 we started hearing about personal AI devices, uh,
Mhm.
more like post smartphone wearables, not just AI glasses and pins, but also focusing more on the visual context rather than app-based interaction, and
Mhm.
then using that inference to drive the next kind of prompt the next decisioning, right? And here I'm using prompt in an inverse format, not the human prompting the agent, but more like the agent in the variable prompting the human, right? So that phase is kind of we got to hear in Q4. I'm guessing this is what is going to drive the next wave in probably next year. And from a industry perspective as well, right? So we had these top four companies racing to develop the best models, and very soon we started seeing that, yeah, I mean, there is never going to be a clear winner. So
Right.
uh, you have to have an orchestrator of these models, and that's where this things like Perplexity browser and all those things started coming in, and industry also started realizing it that models have reached a certain level of maturity to kind of start creating more industry specific models and alliances. So we heard like the financial companies like JP Morgan, Bloomberg launch custom trained financial models. Um, so they also are creating a moat on general purpose models that they are also creating a moat so that the general purpose models cannot penetrate because they have the data and the models have the inference reasoning engine. So I'm guessing the next year will be more into other verticals, I guess. Like healthcare is, of course, talked about a lot next year. So I'm guessing the Q4, the industry started, in some sense, I wouldn't say consolidating, but assimilating a lot of the individual innovations that were coming in. And it is also getting more personalized as well as faster with photonic computing being discussed for GPU interactions, and then also custom trained, purpose built, vertical specific models. So I think this trend is what is going to continue on, I guess, in next year.
Beautiful, beautiful. I think you summed it up very well, Sesh, about, I think the right term is more like assimilation. Coming to you, Lucas, I think what are your thoughts about uh, so far things that have happened in Q4 before we get into the interesting outlook for 2026?
Well, to me, maybe the most important news from Q4 in 3 years from now will be, I would believe, that Google came back with a vengeance. Like
Right.
if we went back to 2024 at the end of the year, Google was being called dead in the water. People said like, "Oh, they stumbled, like their entire business will erode. They have no competitive model. Their demos were a joke. Nothing is working. Like this is how an epoch ends, right?" And now they have the best model and
Right.
they have the most comprehensive offering that you can think of in terms of whether it's reasoning models, whether it's integration with cloud services, whether it's multimodal stuff like a nano banana, whether it's world models, whether it's like the full stack from TPUs not being dependent on NVIDIA chips to the data centers that around the world that are at scale. So for me, it's like 2025 Q4, the Empire Strikes Back. And I think at one point, Satya Nadella was asked, like, well, how do you think about Google? And he said, like, well, I think we want to make the big bear dance. And I'm not sure he's all that happy because that bear got found his dancing shoes, and man, oh man, this big boy is stepping away. So um, I think that's for me, like if you think about it, the biggest change, I would say. There's tons of other things going on. But I think now, other than open source thinking models, it's really like Google coming back and staking a claim for the future. And rightfully so, based
Right.
on currently the best model that is out there, right? So
Right.
yeah,
Right.
that's Q4 for me. If I had to condense it down into like one headline, that would be it. Even if there's like 20 others that would be worth our time.
True. True. I
Yeah,
think it's a
that,
great way of connecting back into the Q4. Sesh, sorry, you want to say something on that before we
No,
roll over into the predictions?
yeah, I actually wanted to second what Lucas had said, right? What he says definitely resonated in the way Google is coming strong, right? And they actually took their time, and if you like 10 years back, people always talked about the biggest strength of Microsoft was because all documents were in Word, and they actually controlled the enterprise because of that. And that has completely changed. um, I mean, it was slowly changing with uh, Google coming into the enterprise with Gmail, Docs, Sheets,
Mhm.
Slides, Meet, all of that, right? And they brought the tools, and then suddenly now with the Google Workspace coming in, they're
Right.
able to build on top of it, right? They have the data that enterprises use across all of the domains. And now with this AI assistant in Workspace, they're able to build really powerful um, tools that is using the context and the threads, the documents, the calendars, the meetings and files, and all feeding into AI and creating that organizational memory and then driving decision making, right? So this is really very strong move from Google, and not just that. In some sense, this is just from a enterprise functioning standpoint. They have control of the enterprise's office infrastructure, but also if you saw with its the multimodal reasoning models and then bringing in Nano Banana, they've also ventured into if people have tried this AI marketing tool called Pomeli by Google, uh, it's really very powerful. I mean, creates branded content by just pointing somebody to the website. So here they are bringing in all together, like they're bringing
Mhm.
their their strong models, the tools around it, the enterprise data, and then bringing in real solutions for the enterprises from decision making to marketing. And I'm sure it'll all add up to other things like automation and at every stage, right? So I just wanted to second what Lucas was saying, that Google is becoming a very, very strong player here. It'll be interesting to see what others do.
True, true. I think with that, I think Lucas, let us get into the. Yeah, I think Manjeet is joining as well. Hey, Manjeet.
All right. So,
All right, Manjeet. We just
apologies.
finished.
Just
We just went through the first round of. We kind of went into the all the four different quarters, and both Sesh and Lucas talked about their thoughts about what went in 2025. So you
yeah.
joined at the right time before getting into the 2026 predictions. Maybe before getting into the 2026 predictions, what are your big thoughts about what happened in 2025? Of course, we talked about all the four quarters, starting with Q1 when I talk about we where AI is no longer saying everywhere, but it's getting more accountable. In Q1, when we talked about Gemini 2.0 and other things, and in Q2, we said that innovation outran control, and then we went into all these coding assistants, Llama 4, Cloud 4, and then
Right.
in the Q3, we went into the inflection point where GPT-5 started, and then inference took over the demand. And in Q4, we talked about more about assimilation phase and how Google took over again. So that is what I think we've been talking about. So before getting into the predictions phase, so Manjeet, what is your take on 2025?
Yeah, no, I think that's you guys picked up on some very good, I would say, observations, and then right because there's things are moving very fast, and now I think it's always fun to reflect back. Hey, where we were in January of 2025 versus December. Uh, One thing I was thinking about, like, hey, what are some of the product that really I think reached a point where I call them sticky,
Mm-hmm.
and you hear a lot of validation in terms of their usage and then the growth, and then I think my couple of top ones is Notebook LM. I think it was already in a kind of good spot earlier in the year, but as you see that it has become like whenever there is some sort of your unstructured data, and you need to do the research, you need to understand. You just throw in. Now it can handle a lot more files. Even in free versions, they allow up to 50 different sources, and now you can create slides, right? Earlier, this only was kind of in a, your podcast versions. Now you can create on infographic. So I think it's really opened up a lot of use cases when I think about, let's say, in my domain as a product person, or even in consulting and research role. Um, that's, I would say, my number one pick. Second one is just this whole idea of cursor for X. I think that's because my take is the UX for AI is evolving, right? The conversational interface has been winner, right, from the day ChatGPT came along. But I think cursor really did, whether initially everybody was like, hey, just say wrapper and wrapper. But I think it's found the right balance between how do you make AI plus human collaborate? And it started with, let's say, your developer persona, right? And then now, as you know, Cursor already crossed 1 billion kind of an ARR. But to me, it's like, what are other roles where this cursor for X, like we provide, like, in our Salesforce, we say, AI plus human working together. And I think that's where, whether you talk about in form of agents, or doesn't matter which workflow, like how do you bring in human in the loop that in a right way where it feels like, hey, as part of the workflow. Um, so I'll be curious to see what happens, like, what other winners come in 2026 with this idea of cursor for X from the uh, and then and I think this Claude code, I'm sure you guys, but to me the one angle where Claude code continue to be the winner is your like computer control, right? And that evolved into browser and whatnot. And then the other thing is, I think you mentioned the inference, right? I think the gravity will, no, so far it was still a lot more on the kind of training, pre-training, and whatnot. But as the reasoning model came along, and I think slowly the more usage goes up. And Gemini 3 Flash, I'm sure you guys touched on that. It's really breaks the trade-off between intelligence and the cost. It is again 10x cheaper, and now it's default. So what that means is a lot more queries, a lot more inference, and then that's one. I think the last side, I'm curious to hear if you guys have any thought around this, you know, this innovator dilemma around investments, right? During the year, we talk about a couple of times how much investment is going into specifically, picks and shovels and infra side of the house. And then this Q4 was a lot of is like, hey, is this an AI bubble, right?
Yes.
So there was a lot of debate around whether we were in AI bubble or not. But I think what now I'm hearing less of that compared to November, because in November everybody a little bit of starts to freak out. Okay, where the ROI and what's and slowly people I think are starting understanding that, hey, this is building the foundation, this is building the, and you draw the analogy with the dot com, and then where we build a lot of kind of fiber, and this became a dark fiber. And I tell people, hey, there's no dark GPU today. GPUs are melting, they are getting used. Whether it's really translating into the full ROI or not, I think, yeah, in some places, yes. I think if you look into some of the public companies, like how much revenue shift Meta has able to do using more targeted ads and more better kind of campaign management. So is Google, and so I think in some places showing up. Coding, yeah, is another good one. And I'm personally bullish about the customer service agent, and more specifically, B2C enterprise customer service agent with multimodality. I think it'll be interesting to see.
Beautiful.
That's our number one push. So
Right, beautiful. I think you covered much of the stuff. I think, and of course, it's great that you brought in the product concept back about some of these products that we discussed at a high level. So let's get into the prediction phase. I believe I know, Lucas. We were briefly talking about, but why don't you start with what are your thoughts about what is your outlook? Um, we can term it as predictions or outlook. What do you see? We'll start with you, Lucas.
Yeah.
I mean,
Hey, how about
there's
let's do this. Let's pick
Yeah, good.
our top two or three. I think that
yes, I was about to say otherwise.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
And
Let's
I will
see.
even go one step further. How about we each say one and then we go in a circle and then we see like everybody, so we get a little bit of
True, true.
more dynamism in here. I would say the first thing that I believe what will happen is I think we'll see that the web, which was created for humans by humans, will shapeshift in a way that you will see the first web pages or APIs or web services being built for agents and AI. Let me give you an example. What I mean, when you use a search engine,
Mm-hmm.
it normally like the response time is what, like 100 milliseconds. You have like the fold, you see a certain amount of links. If I have an agent, I need much quicker response times. I don't
True.
need everything to load, but I need everything a little bit different. So the API might look very similar, but how the service reacts and feeds the AI is different for an agentic version. And I think we'll see that web pages will start trying to provide information for agents. APIs will have native documentation for MCP servers, for agents. So I think the face of the internet will recognize AI as a first level like customer or as a citizen of the digital world, and it won't be just for humans anymore. So that's my first prediction.
That's a
Moving
good
on
take,
to
I
this.
think. What do you want to say, Manjeet? You want to continue there? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I would say it was somewhat related, but more specifically around, I would say, this autonomous agent. And so what's happening is if you look into, so there's one particular benchmark called METTR, which basically
Mm-hmm.
tracks how long this model can run without human intervention. So, and we think about some of these complex workflows, right? Supply chain or, even someone like procure to pay end-to-end workflow, or even in customer services. So what that means is that so far this AI has been pretty good at very defined smaller task. And now how long it can go, let's say next 12 months, like 2026 here.
Mm-hmm.
My prediction is in 2026, we will reach to where this AI agent can do the task given a goal,
Mm-hmm.
or pretty much entire day, like what we are like. Entire day means 8 hours work day, and it feels a little slow until, but I think the once it breaks the barrier, then we will see it'll really accelerate transformation in many workflows, because a lot of those workflows are kind of, long running, long running, not in the sense like it's doing research for 8 hours, but it's like it worked for an hour, then waiting for, let's say from customer service to marketing to sale, and then ultimately, let's say, result into a jobs to be done. I think they will be as close to a typical workday.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I'm kind of excited and a little bit of anxious about as well what it means to the team size and companies, and then I think so that's kind of my take here.
And how the outcomes would be, how the outcomes will be perceived when these
Exactly.
long running agents would uh, get through that.
Yeah, no, all of
Beautiful.
that. How do you
Yeah.
price it, and then
How do we price it? And yeah.
yeah, and what's the margin, right? Say in these kind of, it'll be very different than a typical SaaS, because SaaS has been a good, healthy, between 70 to 80% margin, from
Mm.
last 20 years. But these in AI, the margin are still thin. I mean, unless you are NVIDIA, right? Not on the infra side, but on the application side, on the agent side, the margins are very thin, and let's see how it will play out.
Right, right. And coming to you, Sesh, I think what is that one thing I think you are looking forward when we talk about 2026? And
Yeah, I mean, it was very interesting to hear Lukas and Manjeet, of course. They're coming more from an enterprise standpoint. Um, the part I feel would be interesting or may take shape is in 2025, we were hearing about um, the AI becoming cloud heavy, and then we were also talking about uh, AI moving to the edge, the whole inference moving to the edge. So what I'm hoping is that we'll start seeing some of these edge devices, and including some of your personal devices, your wearables, having those agents, understanding your lifestyle and data and your decision-making processes more deeply. And hopefully by end of 2026, you will see these wearables swarm with you and participate, negotiate, and decide on your tasks. And it could be as simple as shifting your schedules or maybe prompting you for the right next question or even fetching those next questions answer that you are thinking because it knows you deeply. So I'm probably getting ahead of myself, but I feel directionally that's bound to happen. Whether it's happening in 2026, we will see.
Yeah, I think you brought a nice, interesting point about the wearable devices or the edge devices communicating back to the humans. Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
from my standpoint, I know all the three of you brought up some very good predictions and outcomes that you're looking into. I'm kind of looking into something like energy first AI strategy. I think how these things are going to be taken over some of uh, the board language across the globe, and how I know there is a lot of focus on energy. I didn't want to go into compliance yet, but I think energy is one thing I've been thinking a lot, and how 2026 can shape up.
Which
So
angle are
coming,
you, which
yeah,
angle
go
are
ahead.
you thinking, Raghu, about energy? It's more around, I would say, the more clean energy, or more build more reactors, or is like,
No,
hey,
not clean energy. I'm thinking
let's
more
move
about,
build data center in space, right?
yes. So that is where I think, because if you see,
Yeah.
at least the hyperscaler in the hyperscaler world, I think that is one thing which is happening right now. I think a lot more focus has been on building more data centers, I think, across the globe. So I believe this is where, to create more compute, obviously you need to create more data centers. I think to create more data centers, I think you need to focus more on energy. And I think even US is now kind of pushing a lot more on the US China race, on US China AI race, or whatever we term it. Energy has become the centerpiece. How it will evolve into the boardrooms, I do not know, but I'm thinking like this will become one of those topics for discussion. And how do you bring in that?
Yeah, no, totally agree. And I think the one thought says, let's make one prediction, right? When I think about edge
Mm-hmm.
computing and
Mm-hmm.
edge inference, my take is, seems like that's Apple's strategy, even though it's not so obvious. They have tried in that direction, even let's say a year ago, with their own, version of model, and then Shiri, and then but things were not ready. But Apple may surprise everybody else in terms of how well they can integrate this and then hold this routing. Hey, by default, it's edge, you do it on edge and only go to cloud when it must. So my prediction is kind of, in that realm is, I think Apple will and should be, given they are sometime, the late adopter, but then they, from the quality and end-to-end integration standpoint, uh, and obviously Google will do the same for Android ecosystem, but I think they are, that's kind of my take on, because we do need a very seamless, like when is this whole your Jarvis sort of goal into where you continue to build your memory and personalization. It knows you, and then right, and it unlocks so many use cases, how people travel, and bookings and whatnot. So
Yeah.
exciting. Let's see.
Right. And what are your thoughts? I think again, each one of you, what are your thoughts about this consolidation of large language models? Do you think this race between these large language models will continue further? Or do you think that there's going to be some kind of a consolidation, meaning Google focusing on this, cloud focusing on that, OpenAI? I know, Lukas, you were briefly mentioning about it, I believe, earlier.
Yes. So I think multimodality is baked in, and also world models. I think if you want to be a frontier lab in 2026, you will have to have the ability to deliver on all these parts, simply because there's too much training data and too much to learn in this latent space, no matter what the modality is. You cannot pick just one and forsake all the others, because there's too much insights and knowledge that otherwise you would also like forsake. However, that goes back to what I said. I really do think that Claude and Anthropic, for that matter, was really smart picking their battles and saying, look, we go after B2B development focus. We can really cleanly showcase our ROI. We don't have to be a B2C consumer product. There's already one out. And also, we believe in AGI. And so, creating a virtuous feedback loop of development AI that can improve itself, which is clearly the goal here, is fully aligned with a more streamlined like targeting of the B2B space. And I believe if OpenAI wants to stay relevant, they have to embrace their accidental B2C space. Like, they are now the de facto face of consumer interaction with AI, just like Google, right, became the de facto interaction space for search. And I do think they will double down on that. But it's different, right? Your go-to market, how you translate a capability into something consumers use and how you price it does not necessarily mean that they're giving up on, oh, we're not doing reinforcement learning with human feedback or whatever, right? I think they will all converge on the technology space, because it's only getting faster, and they're in a very tight and vicious race, like an arms race, right? And but that still can mean that they go to market in very different ways. And by the way, that's maybe my last prediction for 2026. I believe that we'll see agents or services offered at prices that totally have escape velocity in terms of like what we're used to. Right? If we pay $20, $200 for a subscription, we're like, oh, okay, this is pricey, but I use it every day. It's really valuable, and I kind of want to be on the bleeding edge. Okay, $200, fine. I think we'll see real like monetization schemes where all of a sudden companies will go like, you know what? We want to buy an agent for a month and it will cost us $20,000. And it will be fine. And so I expect, and I would predict, that in terms of go-to-market and monetization of AI, 2026 will be wild, and we finally let go of the shackles of the old models and come up with new stuff that hasn't been seen before. That is a
Right.
meaningful break to the current overtone window.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
no.
Sesh, yeah, you want to add anything on top of that, Sesh?
I think you guys covered it pretty well. Whether models will lose relevance, definitely no. They will continue to become better. Um, they'll probably it'll become more of a space where orchestration becomes the real battleground. The value shifts from pure LLMs to routing between models, task decomposition, agent coordination, and then of course cost optimization. Those will be the parameters, I guess, will become more critical. So the winners may not be the model builders. They'll be the winners, maybe the system builders. So that's what I'm thinking we'll see in the next year.
And I think now we are getting thanks for those insights. So before we wrap up this year-end podcast, any personal insights or any personal tips or fitness tips? I know, Manjeet, you always have something up your sleeve, but who wants to start?
Yeah, no, see I'm a little bit of related to fitness. One thing I'm thinking about is like, see, the AI and robotics will be huge and bigger, and there's no going back, right? So one, there's a couple of these races going on who will create the first digital god, and right, let's say AGI, and then between these labs, then the more practical version, what kind of Luke alluded to, like, okay, hey, let's pick our swim lane wherever possible. So it's clear Anthropic is going enterprise, and then I think it'll be interesting to see between OpenAI and Google where things land. I think Google will distance from OpenAI way faster in the first half of 2026 because they have so much breadth and distributions, and then the way they are integrating into these, their large, 4 or 5 billion kind of, the install base. I think these 800 million ChatGPT user will feel small as it gets really good, and then right. Because see, on the benchmark standpoint, everybody's maxing out the benchmark. So it's now it comes down to real task and integration, what kind of Sesh is mentioning. So coming down to my fitness, I think the when people, let's say, work less or don't have to work less, as you see, a lot of people are making claim on internet, even Ellen, and everybody's like, oh, we don't have to work, right? In this humanoid version of robots will be at, let's say, in the factories and at home. I'm really like what we will do. And I always kind of comes down to that what will be the motivation factor. Even if, let's say, we have universal basic income or you're like, that takes care of that, the financial part, what will be that motivator for people to stay mentally fit and physically fit? I think we have to go, we'll be back to the fundamentals. It's like, okay, now we need to move, we need to sleep on time, and then, right? Yeah, so that's kind of how I think, and the role of everybody's motivations, and then the whole this fit industry is, I think, will evolve. Will be all kind of, the pretty holistic, focused on longevity and whatnot. And then, so probably next time when we'll chat, I'll have a bit of a thread that I'm trying to see what's happening in the, let's say, this wearable devices when you look at the Aura Ring and others, and then, right. Um, and if you're able to bring all this data into one place, these models can do a fantastic job to make you more proactive. But ultimately, I think if you don't love to move, because to me physical movement is the cornerstone of really living a energy, full of energy, and then all that. So um, that's kind of, yeah, a little bit of distorted thoughts, but since you asked, I thought I'll try to connect what's happening, the different
Right,
layer.
right. Over to you, Lucas. How do you want to close it? Your personal insights or your anything that you would want to bring it up before I go to Sesh?
We're still early, and that's the craziest thing to say after the last couple of years. And it will be really important as everything accelerates to not lose one's head and to listen like podcasts like this and to follow us on LinkedIn or wherever you want just to stay informed and focus on the real important news and not just the massive amounts, like the avalanche of information that's hurtling our way. So enjoy, detox, get away from the screen for a couple of days, and then come back to, wherever you can find us.
Great, great.
Love it. Yeah.
Over to you, Sesh. Any closing thoughts from your end?
I guess, yeah, I think as Lucas said, I would just repeat him saying that it's interesting that it's moved so fast, but still we are still in the beginning. So we'll see. I'm waiting for the day where work becomes optional. Then to dwell on Manjeet's point, then we probably go back to a phase where uh, your sense of purpose is your driving motivation to work, right? What are you born to do? that's your
Right.
motivation to work.
Right. Great thoughts, as always, folks. I think looking forward. I know we are 1 week into the end of the year. I know we've recorded this on the 23rd. And of course, we'll go live before the new year.
As we wrap up this year and bring season 16 of XTraw AI to a close, one thing is clear: AI is no longer a conversation about the future. It's a conversation about how we operate today. 2025 showed us what happens when intelligence scales faster than institutions, when innovation meets responsibility, and when curiosity turns into consequence. But this isn't the end of the story. It's the setup. As we head into 2026, we're opening season 17 of XTraw AI with something new, a thought leadership series focused on what comes after the hype: execution, operating models, governance, and real world impact. We'll be bringing in voices who are building, running, and governing AI systems at scale. Leaders who aren't just talking about what AI can do, but what it should do. So stay close, stay curious, and stay engaged. The next chapter of AI isn't about experimentation. It's about responsibility, scale, and trust. Thanks for being part of this journey with us. Happy predicting the future with AI technologies, and stay XTraw AI.